As shown on the screen, anyone experiencing technical difficulties can call 518-598-3966 for assistance. Today's presenters include James Krugler, a project manager with the New York Department of Environmental Conservation, or DEC, and Mark Surgat, project manager for the New York Department of Health. Additional panelists will include Michael Cruden, DEC Remediation Bureau Director, Samantha Salato, DEC Division of Environmental Remediation, David Rubinton, DEC Assistant Regional Attorney, Wendy Keener from the Department of Health, Craig Pettinger, DEC Division of Communications, and Aphrodite Montalvo, DEC Division of Communications Region 1. Before we begin the presentation, I'd like to go through a few housekeeping items. Microphones are muted and cameras turned off for all attendees. This meeting is being recorded. Closed captioning can be turned on or off by clicking the CC button in the bottom left corner of your computer screen. Following the presentation, we'll move to a question and answer and public comment period. Now, I'd like to turn the presentation over to James to get started.
Thank you very much, Amy. So as Amy's mentioned, my name is James Krugler. I'm the project manager at DEC for the former Dzus Fasteners State Superfund site. I'd like to begin with some background information on the site. I'll try to work through quickly. The Dzus Fastener facilities were located at what's now 425 Union Boulevard in West Islip. While it was in operation, Dzus produced wastes from its metal plating and finishing operations that consisted of oils, heavy metals, and salts. From this list of wastes, the heavy metals cadmium and chromium were the contaminants that migrated from the site and impacted Willets Creek, Lake Capri, and surrounding areas. There have been a series of environmental investigations and cleanup efforts to remove the contamination from Dzus facility site and everywhere else it's been found above cleanup levels. The most recent cleanup effort involved removing impacted soil and sediment from in and around Willets Creek and Lake Capri. This work was completed in 2020, and since then the site has been at what we call site management, where the site and surrounding areas are monitored regularly to ensure the remedy remains effective and that action is taken if something goes wrong. Here's a map of the former Dzus Fastener property on Union Boulevard, outlined in green and in black. The property is split here into two pieces that we call operable units, or OUs. These are administrative units that DEC uses to break a cleanup site up into areas that require different responses. Just to the east of the site, Willets Creek is flowing from north to south, under the railroad first, and then under Union Boulevard. Zooming out a little bit here, this is a map of the entire Dzus site with all of the operable units highlighted in different colors. The former Dzus Fastener property that I was showing earlier is still highlighted in green and black near the top of the figure. The rest of the site extends south along Willets Creek, through Lake Capri, and into the tidal portion of the creek south of Montauk Highway. I'm going to provide some more detail about the cleanup actions performed at the former Dzus Fastener property itself, which is that part of the site located at 425 Union Boulevard. For the eastern portion of the property, the remedy involved treating contaminated soil by mixing the soil with a cement mixture. So the soil would be converted into a solid cement-like substance that would immobilize the contamination. The remedy also required that areas with solidified soils be covered with a layer of asphalt or an asphalt cap to prevent stormwater from trickling down into the ground, reaching the solidified soils, and leaching the heavy metals out in a process that would produce contaminated groundwater that could leave the site. That asphalt cap was installed in 1996. The western portion of the Dzus Fastener property went through its own cleanup process that involved decontaminating the remaining site buildings before they were demolished, and excavating and removing contaminated soil from leaching pools that had been used to dispose of hazardous waste. I'm going to move ahead now to more recent events since the end of the last cleanup activity in 2020. So in April of 2021, DEC had its consultant, EA Engineering, visit the site as part of a regularly scheduled site management work. And when EA arrived, they discovered that the asphalt cap on the eastern portion of the site had been completely removed. And this was done without the property owner notifying DEC before or after, which is required before removing part of a site's remedy can even be considered for any reason. Since then, DEC has carried out a series of enforcement actions against the property owner. The next slide will explain these in some more detail, but generally speaking, these are actions where DEC sent a legal notice to the property owners, alerting them to the current situation at the site, reminding them of their responsibilities to protect the site remedy and work to restore the remedy if it's been compromised, and also lay out deadlines for responding, potential penalties for not complying. At the same time, DEC continued to carry out sampling at the site and have those samples analyzed for cadmium and chromium. The results of that sampling indicated elevated concentrations in groundwater, as well as Willets Creek surface water and sediment since the removal of the asphalt cap. In some cases, those concentrations have exceeded the applicable standards, criteria, and guidance values that we use to determine whether a response is necessary. As a result of DEC's enforcement actions, the property owner did install a temporary cap in October of 2022 that was approved by DEC. And as of February of this year, the permanent cap was installed as part of their ongoing redevelopment work. As soon as it was observed in April 2021 that the asphalt cap was missing, DEC was in immediate communication with the property owner to determine what happened and why, and to demand that the cap be reinstalled. In September of 2021, DEC issued a notice of violation to the property owner that formally put the owner on notice for the removal of the cap and requested that they enter into an agreement with DEC to replace the cap. This agreement is the order on consent that was put in place in December of 2021. The order on consent did require the property owner to send DEC a work plan for replacing the cap. Unfortunately, the work plan tied the replacement of the cap to the rest of the redevelopment work going on at the site at the time. And subsequently, that redevelopment work stalled out throughout much of 2022. So in September of 2022, DEC issued a second notice of violation that clarified the situation and required that the property owner stop making the cap replacement conditional on the redevelopment work. DEC required at least a temporary cap to be put in place immediately, and one was installed in October of 2022. But once we had a temporary cap in place in October of 2022, DEC determined that there was a need to develop a better understanding of the environmental effects of the cap being removed. The frequency of sampling at the site was increased in 2023 from every 5 quarters, which is the standard for sites that are in site management, to every quarter. And throughout those 2023 sampling events, elevated concentrations of cadmium were consistently found in groundwater, creek surface water, and creek sediment. After the final quarterly sampling event in November, DEC's consultant EA used data from the 2023 sampling results to update some estimates of the amount of cadmium entering Willets Creek. Compared with conditions before the cap was removed, the results were now substantially higher. So in other words, based on 2023 conditions, there was now substantially more cadmium entering Willets Creek than there had been before cap removal in 2021. So here is a map of most of the site and the surrounding area showing groundwater sampling results from the 2023 quarterly sampling. So the former Dzus Fastener facilities is located at that little triangular wedge near the top of the figure here. The red crosshair icons are the locations of groundwater monitoring wells where samples were taken. Each of these locations was sampled every quarter. Each of the tables here correspond to a particular monitoring well, and the highlighted values are concentrations that exceed the applicable DEC water quality value for cadmium. Chromium concentrations are also on these tables, but there were no exceedances observed for chromium. So the big takeaways from these results here are that we did not see any elevated concentrations up gradient of the site at monitoring well 17 and near the top of the figure, and we did not see any elevated concentrations very far down gradient from the former Dzus Fastener property at monitoring well 18, right near the bottom of the figure. At the monitoring wells where we did see elevated concentrations and exceedances, those concentrations were relatively consistent quarter to quarter. There were some ups and downs. There was some variation, but they mostly stayed within the same ballpark quarter to quarter. This indicates that the groundwater contamination was persistent. It was not shifting rapidly or disappearing rapidly down gradient. So this map is zoomed in just a little bit more to focus on the section of Willets Creek immediately behind Captree Plaza, which is the big parking lot area in the upper left-hand corner. This shows the sampling results for Willets Creek surface water and sediment for all of the sampling performed from 2021 through the quarterly sampling in 2023. Not all of these locations were sampled during every event. The surface water and sediment sampling in 2021 started with a single location along the creek at surface water 01, sediment 01, this green dot here. And from there, after that event, DEC decided to expand the sampling both upstream and downstream in an attempt to determine the full extent of contamination in the creek. We did reach upstream locations with no elevated concentrations near the top of the figure here. But by the end of 2023, we had not determined the full downstream extent of elevated cadmium concentrations. The location at the bottom of the figure here, this was a November 2023 sample taken just upstream from the Beach Street Middle School footbridge, which is right here. Those surface water and sediment samples did come back with concentrations exceeding the relevant water quality standards and guidance values. So at this point, I want to provide some additional information to help explain those sampling results. I don't in any way want to minimize concern about these results or imply that they are not serious, because they are. But I do want to make sure I provide as much context as possible to provide the best understanding possible. First, there's no threat to public drinking water because the drinking water supply comes from other sources and it is treated and monitored thoroughly. I want to emphasize that the highest concentrations we have observed in the last few years are not representative of the whole. And in other words, these concentrations, these very high concentrations in some cases, are not being observed everywhere or all of the time. I also want to explain a little more about what these exceedances mean, because depending on whether we are talking about groundwater or surface water or sediment, the standards, criteria, and guidance values change, and their meanings change. So for exceedances in groundwater, this indicates that groundwater would be an impaired source of drinking water. Thankfully, in this case, as I mentioned, the area is served by a public water supply that is not affected by this contamination. For exceedances in surface water and sediment, these represent increased health risks to fish in the case of surface water and aquatic life generally in the case of sediment. So based on the 2023 quarterly sampling results, DEC determined that there was persistent cadmium concentration in groundwater, in creek surface water, and in creek sediment. The data also supported the idea that this contamination was a result of the removal of the asphalt cap back in 2021. In December 2023 and February 2024, DEC sent letters to the property owner updating them on the situation, summarizing the recent sampling results, and requesting that they carry out the investigation and cleanup work that DEC had determined would be necessary to address the current contamination. The cleanup work would come in the form of what we call an interim remedial measure, or IRM. In March of 2024, the owners refused to agree to carry out that additional investigation and cleanup work. At that point, it was determined that DEC could proceed with the work as a state-led project under the State Superfund program. Earlier this month, DEC issued a notice of hearing and complaint against the site owners. This notice indicated there had been a violation of state environmental conservation law and requested a penalty against the property owners. In terms of investigation work, quarterly sampling schedule has continued into 2024, and the first quarter sampling event took place in the first week of April. A few days ago, we did receive the preliminary results back from the lab, so I have figures displaying those results. By preliminary, I mean those results haven't gone through the standard data validation process yet, so I should emphasize that the values are subject to change, although that is unlikely. This map displays April 2024 groundwater results. In general, the concentrations here are pretty consistent with what was observed in each location in 2003, or excuse me, not in 2003, in 2023. This map displays the April surface water and sediment results in the region of Willets Creek immediately behind Captree Plaza. And once again, like with the groundwater, these results are consistent with what was being observed in 2023 in these locations. If anything, in some of these locations, the concentrations of cadmium have trended down slightly. Here are the recent surface water and sediment results for the region of the creek, starting at the top of the middle school footbridge up here and ending just upstream of Lake Capri at the bottom. So Lake Capri is below the bottom of the figure here. The two furthest downstream points, point 14 and point 13 here, these are new sampling locations. And this is the furthest downstream that we've sampled since the beginning of 2021. In these locations, we do have minor cadmium exceedances in surface water, but no exceedances in sediment. These are still mixed results, but it does hopefully suggest that the impacts to Willets Creek sediment have not reached this far downstream yet. So at this point, I will hand over the presentation to Mark Sergat, the project manager for DOH, so he can discuss DOH's role in our current efforts.
Okay, thank you, James. So thanks everybody for attending tonight's virtual public meeting. So at this point of the presentation, I'd just like to take a few quick minutes of your time to discuss the health department's role in this particular project and also discuss the data that's been collected from Willets Creek and describe how it relates to people's exposure potential. So the health department has been and will continue to be involved with the DEC with the review and the approval of the various investigative and remedial plans that are associated with this site. And our main focus is to ensure that we have the adequate data that's needed to identify the nature and extent of site-related contamination, and also to determine whether or not there's any ongoing human exposures to those contaminants. Ultimately, we want to ensure that any selected remedy is protective of public health and remains protective of public health during the site's long-term management. Next slide, please. So this particular slide represents what we mean when we discuss human exposures to environmental contaminants. We're basically determining how anybody from the public could get into contact with the contamination that's been identified at the site. And there's three main exposure pathways in which people can generally get into contact with site-related contamination. And we assess these same pathways at every remedial site that's located across the state. Exposures can basically occur through three mechanisms. One, through inhaling site contaminants. They can occur through directly contacting a site contaminant, or they can occur by ingesting a particular site contaminant. Now, it's important to note that one or more of these contacts really has to occur before a chemical even has the potential to cause a health problem. But also important, and also to keep in mind, is that just because a particular exposure may have occurred, it doesn't necessarily mean that one may experience a negative health effect as a result of that particular exposure. So now that we understand the exposure pathways, let's walk through the environmental data that's been collected and discuss how it relates to people's exposure potential. And at this point, we can essentially eliminate exposure concerns that are related to inhalation. And the reason for this is that the contaminants for this site are heavy metals that don't readily volatilize or evaporate into the air. Also, when any ground intrusive activities are occurring that are going to be related to the site investigation that James referenced, we'll be implementing what's known as a community air monitoring plan to ensure that the work is not negatively affecting the air quality of the surrounding area. Another exposure scenario we can rule out at this point is ingestion of site contaminants in groundwater. And as James alluded to before, right now people are not drinking site-related contaminants in drinking water because the area is served by a public drinking water supply that is not affected by this site contamination. So now I want to shift gears and briefly discuss where we feel exposures can in fact occur as a result of the site's contamination. So based on the data that DEC has presented tonight, cadmium contaminated groundwater has reached the creek and affected surface water and sediment quality. And as a result of that, we now have to conclude that people can be exposed to cadmium in surface water and sediment in Willits Creek, particularly if they get sediment particles or water on their hands and ingest the material through hand-to-mouth activity. Now, it's important to note that even if this were to occur, the risk of health effects as a result of contact with cadmium in the creek is very low. And this is because cadmium concentrations in the creek are significantly lower now than they were before the creek was remediated. However, in order to minimize exposures, we've recommended that people avoid any unnecessary digging and wading in the creek for the time being. Now, we understand that incidental contact with water and sediment may still occur through activities that are associated with the creek, and this could be through fishing or hiking or kids playing in the creek. And in these cases, we'd recommend that people follow good hygiene practices and thoroughly wash their hands after outdoor activities that are associated with the creek. And in general, cadmium does not readily absorb through the skin. It's going to bind tightly with sediment particles. So basically, if the sediment's being washed away properly, we can effectively eliminate this exposure scenario going forward. And real quick, the last exposure scenario I want to discuss briefly is the ingestion of fish from Lake Capri. So currently there is a DOH health advisory that's in effect for Lake Capri due to cadmium contamination. And we put a link in this information in the recent community fact sheet that was released. There's not really much more to say other than please follow the advisories if you choose to fish in Lake Capri. And going forward, fish sampling data will continue to be collected and evaluated. And based on those results, any updates to the advisories will be made accordingly. And that's all I have for now. I know that was a lot of information to listen to, and hopefully it made sense. At this point of the conversation, I'd like to hand the reins back over to James to wrap up tonight's presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark. So moving forward, DEC and DOH will be proceeding with the work that we've determined is necessary to address current contamination. Throughout the month of May, we will have additional investigation work carried out to gather all the information necessary to design and implement an effective interim remedial measure, or IRM, for groundwater contamination. And this investigation will involve sampling the groundwater wells again, sampling soil near the wells with some small bore drills, and performing other tests on groundwater characteristics and groundwater movement. The results from that May study will be used to inform the design of the groundwater IRM. By the end of the summer, DEC intends to have a design ready to share for public comment before the design is finalized and then finally constructed by the end of the year. So that groundwater cleanup measure, the IRM, will be designed to prevent impacted groundwater from continuing to reach Willits Creek. And there are a few approaches that could achieve this goal. And until we finish our investigation work in the spring and until we finish our investigation work in the spring and analyze the results, we don't know what alternative would likely be most effective. But I will briefly describe some of the approaches we're considering and how they would work. So the first option here is called a permeable reactive barrier. This is a barrier wall that is built into the ground, locations chosen to intercept contaminated groundwater. The wall is permeable to the groundwater, but the wall material has mineral components that the cadmium binds to, so that the cadmium would be immobilized and clean groundwater would be allowed to pass through. Another option shown here is would be a series of subsurface chemical injections using specialized injection wells. So in this scenario, a grid or line of wells would be installed down gradient of contaminated groundwater, and then water with special chemical amendments would be injected into the subsurface. The chemical reactions that take place would form cadmium minerals that would effectively take the cadmium out of the groundwater and immobilize it. The other byproducts of these chemical reactions, they would be harmless byproducts, not contributing to the contamination of the groundwater. The cadmium minerals could later be excavated and disposed of if necessary. So while this IRM is being designed and developed, at the same time as the field investigation planned for May, DEC and our consultant EA will be performing additional testing of these possible approaches in a lab setting and in the field. EA will be performing additional testing on, these tests will be consisting of samples taken, normally samples of contaminated groundwater, potentially soil as well, and performing small-scale versions of the IRM, all the IRM alternatives on those samples to get a better sense of the effectiveness at scale. So throughout all this process and the next steps for the rest of the year, DEC is committed to keeping the public informed through in-person community availability sessions that we plan to hold later in the year to discuss ongoing development of the IRM, results of ongoing monitoring, and planned post-IRM activities as those take shape. And notice of those in-person sessions will be distributed in advance via community updates like we've sent out recently. And in the meantime, questions or concerns can be directed to myself and to Mark. So following the design of that groundwater IRM, it will be completed based on the final design after a period of public comment, as I mentioned. And after construction is finished, DEC will be carrying out additional investigations to confirm the effectiveness of that groundwater IRM, and also to determine the potential need for future cleanup actions to address Willets Creek sediment and Willets Creek surface water. So, as I mentioned, people can reach out to myself and Mark with comments, questions, and concerns. But if there are any inquiries into the site history, past site documents, those documents are stored at locations here. They're physically stored at West Islip Public Library, as well as the regional DEC headquarters in Stony Brook. And there are public repositories of information pertaining to the site as well. We have a site webpage at the first hyperlink there, and the second hyperlink there is a publicly available online repository of past site documents. I'll conclude by displaying contact information for myself and for Mark. This contact information is also available on the DEC webpage for this site, which it should be one of the first search results if you search NYS DEC Dzus. And I believe that's all I have. So I think at this point, we will open it up to a Q&A.
Thanks, James and Mark. We will now transition to our Q&A period. Attendees can choose to participate in one of two ways. You can either type questions into the chat, which will be read aloud and directed to the panelists, or you can raise your hand to have your microphone unmuted to speak. For online users, it looks like a small hand at the bottom of your screen. For attendees who called in, you can press *3 to raise your hand. We do expect that a number of attendees will want to provide input or questions, so I will try to go back and forth between voice and chat requests in the order in which they come in. Questions in chat, I don't believe are visible to all attendees. And if there are chat questions that are similar in nature, or I might try to combine them when I verbally read them aloud. Any questions that cannot be answered can be directed to James and Mark via email shown on the screen, but I'll also read out their email addresses again at the end of the meeting. To ensure as many of you as possible have a chance to contribute, we ask anyone requesting to speak to limit your discussion to 2 to 3 minutes. If we start getting past that, I may jump in and ask you to complete your thoughts. We also ask you to keep your discussion to a single question and then a single follow-up where possible. So we have some questions coming in already, some hands up. I'll ask the panelists to come on camera, and the first hand that I have is an online user with the name of Adrian. Adrian, I'm unmuting you.
You hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I have a little laryngitis, so I apologize. This is Adrian Esposito, Executive Director of Citizens Campaign for the Environment. First and foremost, thank you so very much for having this public meeting. It's very important to the members of the public as it is to our organization, so thank you so much for that. Couple of points. I know you want it limited to one question, but just a couple of points. One is that what you didn't mention, if it was ascertained if the cap was originally removed by accident or intentionally. Number two is I also noticed right above the ball field, when you had the data sheet up of the samples, there were samples that were between 500 and 700 for the cadmium, which, as you know, are quite extensive. And so we are compelled to ask once again, as we did in 2018, to do a full excavation of the contaminated soil so that this problem does not happen again. In 2018, we testified and put in writing that we thought it would be better for the health of the environment, the health of the public, the lakes, and the tributary if all of the cadmium was excavated. At the time, the increased cost was only $2 million, which now looks like a bargain compared to the cleanup that's going to have to happen. So we want to really stress to the DEC that to require that the soil be removed permanently, because we're going to continue to have floods. We have sea level rise. We're going to continue to have the spread of these chemicals when they're left on the shores or near the shores of these kind of tributaries. And the last thing is that the cadmium, although it moves slow, we the two remediations that you're looking at, we would strongly prefer the reactive barrier as a remedy as opposed to the chemical injections. We think that's smarter. It will avoid future problems, and we just want to get that in there. But we'll be providing written comments, and thank you again for the forum tonight.
Thank you, Adrian.
So I can respond to those comments as much as possible. I might need some help remembering the order of things there, but just wanted to start out by saying thank you for joining and providing all that feedback. I believe the first comment was, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the first comment. Number 2 was the high concentrations.
Well, the first one was just about, did you ever ascertain if the cap was removed intentionally or by accident?
Yes, so the cap was removed intentionally, and the property owner told us in 2021, before the first notice of violation in September, they let us know that the cap had been removed by one of their contractors working on site, working on their redevelopment plans for the site. And I believe that from what the property owners told us, the contractor decided that the first order of business was to tear up this asphalt cap. That was going to have to be removed in order to carry out the remediation work, but it was not supposed to be the very first step. It was not supposed to be done without notice to DEC and consent from DEC. It was not supposed to be done without any sort of plan to put down a temporary cap after a certain period of time had elapsed. And so when we showed up in April, we had no idea why the cap was gone or what had happened, but we did get that story from the property owner in the coming months in 2021. And then the second point was about some of the elevated concentrations in the hundreds of milligrams per liter in groundwater. And I agree that those are high concentrations. To be frank, they are the highest concentrations at that one particular monitoring well in the middle of Captree Plaza. Those are the highest concentrations in groundwater that we've seen since we've been monitoring that well as far back as 2006. It's substantially higher than anything we've seen at that well or any other well. And I think that part of why we are seeing that is because this contamination is a result of different events than the previous contaminations or the previous rounds of recontamination. And this time there was the remedy was effectively half of the remedy was removed from the site, and there's really no assurances we can make about half a remedy remaining effective. And so it does seem like the cap before then, the cap was doing its job and preventing stormwater infiltration, and afterwards it was really necessary to restore in order for the remedy to remain effective. Could you remind me of your third point?
I was just pointing out that we prefer the permeable reactive barrier as a method for additional remedy rather than the injection of the chemicals that the cadmium would bind to. That's all. You don't have to respond to that. It's just my 2 cents.
Sure. Yeah, that's understood, and it's definitely an alternative we're considering, but we will be testing that and other alternatives thoroughly before we make a decision.
I'm going to move on to the next attendee. This is a call-in user 10. I'm going to unmute you. Your number starts with a 631987.
Hi, good evening. My name is Christina Marks. I am a parent in West Islip. I am also on the West Islip Board of Education as a trustee, although I am here representing myself this evening and I am not here to speak for the board. Thank you for the forum and thank you for taking my question. I have a lot of concerns about the timeline. And if you can correct me if I'm wrong anywhere, for the record, neither myself or anyone that I know was able to access your link. All of us received errors. So I could not look at any of these materials as you were going through them. I understand you will post them and I intend to follow up and look at them as soon as they're on the website. But you said that in April 2021 was when your first observation occurred that the cap was removed. I have written down that your first formal notice to Island Associates was September 2021. That's about 5 to 6 months. I'm wondering what transpired during that time. And furthermore, a second formal notice wasn't issued until September 2022. That's almost a year and a half later, with a final fixed date of October 2022. I'm just wondering if, I guess, why there was an emergency, why the DEC did not just fix it yourselves and then sue Island for the cost of repairs. It seems like sitting around doing nothing for over a year was, I just don't understand why that happened. And, you know, as a parent, I know for a fact that my son did work for the school in that creek as part of school projects, and that was last year. So in addition to the timeline and asking what the DEC could have done better and faster, my question is, the first that I was notified of this was maybe a month or so ago. If all of this was known to have happened, of course, there's no guarantees that there were going to be found toxins, but it did take you a while, and no one was notified until you actually found something. If a whistle had been blown when you knew that the cap was missing, we could have prevented students from working in the creek as part of any kind of school function. So those are my 2 points. And again, thank you for taking my question.
I think I can provide responses to most of those questions. So first of all, I'm sorry to hear that there's been some issues with connectivity and seeing the slides. We will be posting either the slides or the recording of this presentation, or both, on the site webpage. As for the timeline, I understand the frustration with that timeline. It does look like a lot of nothing. I have I guess a few points to make there. One would be that you know, on that list of legal actions taken against the property owner, that is a highlight of some of the most formal, official, high-level things we were doing, and notices we were sending out. But in the meantime, before the first notice of violation was sent out, we were in communication with the property owner immediately to determine what had happened, and also to get them to agree to replace the cap as soon as possible. And at that point, the property owner agreed that they would be putting the cap back, and that it would be done quickly. And unfortunately, the way that this site works, the way that state Superfund sites work, is that at that point, in situations like this, where we have a property owner that says they are willing to perform this kind of, we would call it a corrective measure. You know, the remedy's been broken, something has gone awry, and it needs to be corrected. In those cases where the property owner says they'll do that, DEC is required to work in good faith with that property owner, and work with them to have them carry out the work. And only when they formally, officially refuse to carry out the work can we proceed with, as you said, doing the work ourselves, and then trying to foot them with the bill, trying to come after them for cost recovery after the fact. So it's an unfortunate side effect of the normal process that we have to follow in these situations. That being said, I recognize that this is still a very drawn out timeline, and some of that is due to the fact that we had to continue acting in good faith, and some of that is due to the fact that initially the schedule for putting back the cap, the original schedule and the original work plan put forward by the property owner, we allowed the property owner to tie the restoration of the cap to the completion of their redevelopment work on site. And then in the subsequent months of most of 2022, that redevelopment work stalled and slowed down. It dragged out for a number of reasons. And once again, it took us a while to realize what exactly the problem was, and to fix it with the second notice of violation, saying that the cap needs to be restored immediately. It cannot be made a condition of site restoration, of site redevelopment, rather. So I think, in terms of notifying the public, That was just about a month ago. And when you look over this timeline, I can understand frustration with it taking, years, on the order of years, for us to come to the public and tell them what's going on. And the way I look at it is that the community was informed about the current conditions on site and off site as soon as we had a complete narrative of what was going on and what was going to be done about it. We needed to determine whether those increased levels of cadmium in groundwater were persistent, and we wanted to confirm that the increased cadmium seemed to be the direct result of the release of contaminated groundwater from the former Dzus Fasteners site. We could connect that to the property owner being responsible for the illegal removal of the asphalt cap. And then we needed to offer the follow-up investigation and cleanup work to the property owner before we could move on ourselves, which we are doing now. And once we had determined that this would be a state-led effort, the final piece of that narrative fell into place. And within a few days, actually, we sent out our first community newsletter. So when violations at a site occur like this, we tend to focus our efforts on achieving compliance as soon as possible, implementing a corrective measure as soon as possible, so that we can stop the bleeding, so to speak, as soon as possible. We can protect human health and the environment as quickly and effectively as possible. But we do recognize that we need to keep the community updated better than we have the last few years, and we intend to do that going forward. I believe you also mentioned some health and exposure concerns, and Mark, if you don't mind me turning the spotlight on you, I might have you answer those.
Well, if I'm hearing the question correctly, I believe it was just with respect to the outdoor learning classroom, which I'm not entirely familiar with respect to how intimate the school district is with the creek. But as I indicated in my narrative, right now the risk of health effects as a result of contact with cadmium in the creek is very low. And we're not expecting health effects from people if people were to contact that. And right now the data looks very favorable in terms of the more recent sediment data and the surface water data that's been collected. We're now actually nearing data that's comparable to our soil cleanup objectives that were used for the site's remediation. And also in terms of surface water quality, we're also approaching levels that are consistent with applicable drinking water standards. So I can understand the frustration as well with not having this information at hand before when the information was slowly coming out. But I can assure you, even before, when the relative values were higher, even at those levels, we still were not expecting health effects to occur from incidental contact with that material. That's all I really want to mention on that point for now.
Amy, I think you might be muted.
Thank you. I want to quickly address a question that was in the chat. Kevin Peterman asked, how many people are on this webinar? There are 87 participants total, 12 panelists, and 75 attendees. Now I'm going to go to the next caller, call in user 15. Your phone number begins with 631-661. I'm going to take you off of mute. Are you there? Oh, they lowered their hand. Okay, I'm going to switch to call in user 30-631-539.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
My name is Deborah Shalis. I live north of the tracks. However, I have kids in the school. In 2017, the number one complaint from the residents in this town was that they felt in the dark. No one even knew that you were sending updates to the library. No one had any clue how to get any information. Some of the population is elderly and can't even attend this virtual meeting because they don't know how. I'm not elderly and I had trouble getting on, a lot of trouble. Most of us can't see your slides, as you've already been told. I called the DEC on a biweekly basis, generally speaking, for 4 years in order to streamline information to the town in one place in a timely manner while I was going through cancer. 4 years I did this. And here we are. It's like a nightmare Groundhog Day. You all know at the DEC that this contamination flows south. You all know that it runs through people's backyards with pets and children. You all know that the creek runs behind the schools where the kids play and have activities such as sports, etc. Back in 2017, I questioned the monolith. I questioned if it was really a good idea. I questioned what would happen during an earthquake, which we just felt. I was also told that the new owners would not be anywhere near the monolith, that was off limits. My question is, if, hypothetically speaking, this was the first time you were called here for this contamination, in the year 2024, with the new technology, would you choose the remedy of a monolith? Because it seems very clearly that the monolith is a problem. It has been a problem, and I think it will, in my opinion, continue to be a problem. And the reason why it will be a problem is because you put in a remedy that most people don't understand. And there is not enough of working together. All of the entities, the DEC, the new landowners, the previous landowners, the town of Islip, the politicians, the Department of Health, all of these people, all of these entities should be working like well-oiled gears in order to make sure that our environment is safe, and no one is doing that. And quite frankly, you all dropped the ball, all of you. I am not a scientist, but I don't need to be a scientist to have common sense. I understand your protocols, which you just said about having, to wait and you want them to comply and, quickly get a remediation team and, put the cap back on and all of that stuff. Well, you know what? If that is your protocol, then that needs to be changed because clearly that doesn't work for this particular Superfund, where it runs through people's property and is right there with children. You all know this information. So maybe your protocols should change because this is not working. And this should be a shining example for all Superfunds going forward. This is not okay. You should have sounded the alarm because you know what? Better safe than sorry. Be proactive. Hey, something happened. The cap was removed. It might be okay, but you know what? For now, call the schools. Make sure no one goes in the creek. Get word out to the public so we can act accordingly until we are told it is safe. Don't you think that would have been a better idea? Don't you think that would have worked better? Don't you think that that would have been safer? So again, my question is, in the year 2024, would you really choose a monolith? And can you remove it? And can it be better going forward? Or is this going to be a continuous problem forever?
Thank you, Deborah. James?
So I think when the original remedy at the former Dzus Fasteners property was decided on, as Adrienne mentioned, excavation and disposal of the contaminated soil was considered, and aside from the cost considerations, I believe at the time DEC identified some significant technical problems with trying to remove the contaminated soils from that eastern portion of the site. That eastern portion of the site comes to a very narrow, comes to a pretty narrow point. And to the north of it is a railway, to the south of it is a highway. And I think those technical, I can't say for sure at this point if those technical difficulties would be possible to overcome, if they would have been possible then. I do know that those still exist. It would still be difficult, if not infeasible, to currently excavate as deep as we would need to, as close as we would need to both the railway and Union Boulevard, and be able to guarantee the stability of both the railway and the road while we excavate. I know that we do continually reevaluate our remedies to ensure that they're protective, and I would emphasize that based on the data that we have, based on the information that we have, and the results from the samples that we've collected, we have a lot of evidence to support the idea that the cap was effective when it was in place. And it was effective at minimizing, if not eliminating, stormwater runoff that reached the monoliths, and that the main problem here, and the reason that we're here attempting a cleanup again, is that the remedy was broken. And that's a problem that every single remedy at every single site would have. If half of the remedy is removed, like I said, DEC can make no guarantees about the effectiveness of the other half that remains in place. At that point, we rely on the compliance and the cooperation of the property owners, the people who remain in charge of the site and the remedy after it's been installed. And like you pointed out, and like we've discussed, the process that we're required to follow, it can be a torturous one. It can take a while, and I do understand as much as I can, as someone who doesn't live in the area and isn't directly affected, the way you've laid out. I do understand in a limited way the frustration with not knowing, and DEC not making this public sooner. I can't, since I'm project manager, I can tell you though that I'm going to make myself available as much as I can to anybody who wants to reach out to me with questions or concerns about the site. I appreciate you flagging the problems with communication and accessing information, and I'd appreciate the opportunity to get into specifics at some other time, and work to streamline things. And I guess I'll close by saying that, as long as I'm project manager at this site, understanding the history here, understanding the decades and multiple rounds of cleanup worth of frustration about the way this is going, I will make it my top priority. It's it really can't be any other way as project manager.
Thank you, James. Before we get to the next question, I do want to let attendees know that we have been made aware that there were problems logging into the meeting, and we've been trying to work through some of those technical difficulties. The slides will be posted online for those of you who are calling in who cannot see them. Now let me take another question. I'm going to grab one from the chat now. This is, the first question is, when, and this is from Kevin Peterman, when there, well, it's not a question, it's a statement. When there is a heavy rain, most of our yard floods. We are very concerned about long-term issues. Can you address that?
Yes, yeah, I can. So I've heard this. I've heard similar concerns from other homeowners so far that have reached out to me directly since the original community update that we sent out about a month ago. And I guess I want to take a minute to explain how this situation, this current contamination is different from the last round. And so I understand that in the last round there were residential soil. There was soil in people's yards that had been contaminated with cadmium, and at concentrations exceeding the cleanup levels. And so there were samples taken, there were excavations made, and so the contaminated soil was excavated, disposed of, and replaced with clean backfill. And that investigation and the finding of the contamination, we believe, is a result of a few different very large and exceptional storm and flooding events that occurred before the last round of cleanup. In particular, Superstorm Sandy. I know there were a few others that I'm forgetting at the moment, but those storms had the creek flood to the point that the contaminated sediment and surface water in the stream was being deposited on the soil in people's yards. And that's our working theory that is backed up with sampling data, backed up with our pretty detailed conceptual model of the site. That's our theory as to how people's yards were contaminated before the last round of cleanup. Since the last round of cleanup, though, since the soil in those yards was remediated, I know that there have been some flooding events. There have been some big rainfall events, but the key difference here is that, to my knowledge and understanding, the stream itself is not flooded to the point that it is rising up and then spilling out into people's yards. That's the main mechanism, as far as we understand, that's the main mechanism for the creek contaminating people's yards, particularly on the eastern banks of Willits Creek and those neighborhoods on that side of the creek. So all that being said, as part of the investigations we're going to be performing later this year and into next year, we will be taking a look at Willits Creek floodplain soils. We will be testing those and analyzing them for cadmium and chromium. And just in the same way that we're sampling further downstream every time, we're expanding the spatial extent of our sampling to make sure that we understand the full extent of it. And if and when we get to the point that we have reason to believe that people's yards have once again potentially been contaminated, we will let people know. We will be keeping people informed with sampling results, and we'll carry out any investigations and remediations necessary to avoid that.
Thank you, James. I am going to take another call-in user. This one, it's call-in user 47, phone number 516987. Are you there?
Hi, good evening. Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Dr. James Birch. Actually a trustee on the Sable Schools Board of Education, also a trustee on the organization James Great South Bay Environmental Group. I am speaking for myself. Really, one is a statement and two is a question. The first statement was, we were notified of the bulletin that the cadmium was still leaking, and I recognize that chromium is also a problem. In April, there was that recent public notice. I just wanted to kind of put something out there to the audience as well. The two people responsible for the creeks in West Islip from Saves Great South Bay, Ed Reagan and Ed Merschel, Andy Merschel, we stated our intentions of going into the creek in March, right before April. So we appreciate the DEC putting it out there after we stated we were going into the creek, that there was a continuing leak. I did want to put that fact out there, but my question is I recognize, between 2009, and this is a timeline question again, referring to their own process. Between 2019 and 2020, you did a lot of remediation, $20 million, 80,000 tons of soil. The question, though, is if we learned in 2021 that the cap was removed, why did the DEC issue a no action in 2022? And there was a public input period, February to March. Why was no action taken if we knew the cap was removed? And that's really my question.
So that no action decision that was finalized in 2022, that only refers to the operable unit, or the part of the site that encompasses the tidal portion of Willets Creek, the furthest downstream portion, right before it transitions, on some imaginary line into the South Bay. And that decision was made based on extensive sampling data, that sampling done within that operable unit, within the tidal portion of Willets Creek, that indicated to DEC and DOH that there were no that the contamination found further upstream in Willets Creek and in Lake Capri had not affected the tidal portion of Willets Creek in a way that presented a threat to human health or the environment. So with a site this big, there are a few different areas of the site being cleaned up at different times and in different ways, and sometimes those timelines, those separate but interrelated timelines, do overlap in an unusual way like that. That no action decision was not meant to refer to the rest of the site, and it was done with the sound analysis of sampling data taken from that part of the site.
Thank you, James. I have a question in the chat. When will you test yards along the creek, as we are very worried about our pets who definitely ingest the grass close to the creek? That's from Stacy.
So at the moment, our focus for as we expand the sampling outside of the creek channel itself, because right now when I'm talking about sediment sampling and surface water sampling, that's happening right in the creek channel itself. The next step to expanding the scope would be moving out of that creek channel into the immediate floodplain areas on either bank. And we'd be testing the soil there to determine if we see elevated concentrations, to determine if we see exceedances. And I think at that point, if we did see elevated concentrations and exceedances in that floodplain soil, we would then move on to people's yards. We would continue to expand outwards until we find the full extent of the contamination. So unfortunately, I can't give you a very detailed timeline. We're a few steps away from that. I can say that the floodplain soil sampling would be a part of this year's investigations, and like I've said, we'll be sharing that. We'll be sharing those sampling results, conveying that information as quickly as we can to the community, and also, helping to interpret what it means and explaining what we're going to do about it moving forward.
Thanks, James. Now I'm going to go to a user, Kathy McConnell, who has her hand raised. Can you off mute, Kathy?
My name is Kathy McConnell. I live on Willits Creek, south of Montauk Highway, in the area where you decided there was no action needed. I'm also a member of the Islip Town Environmental Council, but I'm just speaking as a homeowner here. As we know, with rising sea levels and big rain events that are coming because of our changing climate, we are getting much increased flooding. In fact, a storm a couple of months ago was the first time that the waters actually come up over the bulkhead. And once that starts happening, you start wondering about what's being carried with it. But I wanted to point out what I thought was a missing part of the analysis for this lower section of the creek. I know you took some samples. I believe you took clams, and I believe you took some fish. But what people mostly do on this creek, and what we've been doing for years and years and years, is crabbing. And no one took any samples of the crabs. I've stopped crabbing now because I don't know whether that's something that we can actually ingest without putting ourselves in harm's way. And I just wanted to encourage your team to actually do consider our area as well. And please fill in that gaping hole in the information that you have. Because as we know, the crabs are in the sediment all the time and ingesting sediment all the time. And if the cadmium levels here, and there were concerning cadmium levels here, but I know it was thought that it was not severe enough to require any help. But I think it's important to let people know whether or not animals that they might be eating might be causing them harm.
Thank you, Kathy.
So I, in preparation for this meeting, I did look back at the operable Unit 5, the Willits Creek tidal area no action decision, and the evidence behind it, and so because this was before I became project manager for the site, but from what I saw, from what I read, there were crab tissue samples collected alongside the clam tissues that collected within the Willits Creek tidal area in 2019, and like with the clam. But like with the results from the clam samples, the analytical results from the crab tissue samples indicated that cadmium and chromium were not substantially bioaccumulating in the organisms that were sampled, and that concentrations in those tissues were too low to cause adverse effects or impact the food web. And it's unfortunate that that cadmium and chromium is found, at any level in fish tissue samples, crab tissue samples. But I would emphasize that in this case, the threshold that DEC and DOH was working with is based on a concentration below which it's determined that that concentration is too low to cause adverse health effects. So that was the threshold level we were working with. That is how that level is set. And I guess I would also say that if as we expand the investigations this year downstream, as well as to either side of the creek, if we determine that the Willits Creek tidal area may be impacted by the current contamination, we will be considering collection and analysis of additional samples, including potentially additional tissue samples.
Thank you, James. I'm going to go to another call-in user. This is call-in user number 48. Phone number is 631-848. Are you there?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. My name is Robin Silvestre. I'm the Executive Director at Save the Great South Bay, and thank you for taking my call. I would like to just second Deborah's comments that the people of West Islip deserve to be informed of the potential, even if it's just the potential situation. As soon as that cap was discovered to have been removed, we have people going in and cleaning up along this creek who get in the creek and do get their hands dirty and get their feet wet, and the lack of communication is simply appalling. And like I said, the people of West Islip deserve better. So I suppose my question is, well, I have a couple of questions. One, I saw that the Island Associates, or the developer, the owner of the property, is only being held accountable possibly for a couple of $100,000 when this is a $20 million minimum. Taxpayers of New York should not be paying for a mistake that was or a harm that was caused by a private company. So I'm curious to know how that will be rectified. And second, also that the people of West Islip deserve a full remediation of this project and not piecemeal. We deserve to know as soon as possible the level of contamination in yards where dogs are people plant gardens in their backyard thinking this area is now safe. Our children have been out on the creek as a classroom. I mean, what was the DEC thinking in not advising the community as soon as they knew there was a problem? So I suppose I'll stop there. I could continue on, but I'll ask if you could answer those questions. I'd be most grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, James.
So the first question had to do with the current penalty being requested in the notice of hearing and complaint. So I guess I would start with an asterisk and say that I'm not an attorney, and to my understanding, that penalty of a few $100,000 is specifically for the violation of environmental conservation law that is represented by the removal of the asphalt cap, as well as potentially the subsequent remobilized contamination. And that penalty is, I believe, the maximum penalty possible for that violation. Apologies if I'm incorrect there, but when I read over the notice of hearing complaint, my understanding was that it was the maximum possible penalty, and that particular penalty doesn't preclude the possibility that we follow up with the property owners, or I guess it would be we would request that the Attorney General's office follows up with the property owners to recover costs for any other outstanding investigation or remediation work that has to be done as a result of this contamination. As for your second question, I think I might have to mostly reiterate points that I made before, which are that you know when a violation like this occurs at a site, we do try to focus our efforts on getting the remedy back in place, fully intact, fully compliant as soon as possible, to limit the knock-on effects further downstream and further down gradient. But we recognize that includes protecting human health. So the reason that we do that is to protect human health and the environment, and that part of that approach needs to include public notice and public input into the process. And I would say that going forward as the current project manager, what I'm hearing here tonight is that it needs to be a top priority for us to make this process that there's a series of processes that we have to work with that can constrain us at times. Make that series of processes work as well as possible when it comes to keeping the community updated, and getting input, and organizing our priorities and our next moves accordingly. And so there was a specific concern about the soil sampling or potential soil contamination in people's yards, and I hear that, and I understand that, and we will make that a priority in our investigations taking place later this year to answer that question as soon as possible. Has there been recontamination of residential soils?
And this is Wendy Keener with the Health Department, just to put a little more perspective on that as we're going through that process to get more data. So we did just recently get the data that James mentioned earlier that hasn't been validated yet, but is showing that in the lower portions of Willits Creek, alongside the schools and the homes and things, the levels of cadmium there haven't really risen a whole lot yet. They have increased some, indicating we need to do some risk management decisions to do more investigation to see what levels of contact are possible and things like that. But the data is showing that the cadmium levels are pretty close to the cleanup standards we used for cleaning up the creek in the first place. They haven't risen significantly. So that data is showing us it is time to go look further into it, but it is not something that is likely to cause a large increase for risk of health effects. So we don't expect that there's going to be risk for health effects in the meantime while they're collecting that data. We generally do a kind of a stepwise approach. We look for where the contamination is coming and from and where it's most likely to be first. And if we find it there, then step out. So they've already done the first step of starting to look in the creek to see if those areas have been recontaminated, and they will step out as needed to get the data we need to make sure that exposures aren't going to happen in the future.
Thank you, Wendy.
Welcome.
Question that came into the chat from Ed Reagan. Will the DEC do the full TAL, TCL, and particulate testing to verify that new chemical compounds have been introduced to the Dzus site and creek and lower canal. The town is anxious to know about the presence of arsenic, cyanide, and other harmful materials such as chlorinated hydrocarbons used by the factory.
So since the last round of remedial investigations, cleanup investigations for Willets Creek and Lake Capri, which was 2016 through 2018, when that investigation work took place, the only since then, not just during that point, but since then, the only contaminants of concern from the original full list of contaminants of concern generated at the site, the only contaminants that have been detected in Willets Creek and Lake Capri areas above the relevant cleanup standards, criteria, and guidance are cadmium and chromium. And that's why those have been our primary focus. To verify that the other site-related contaminants have not been remobilized or impacted the creek and lake areas. In addition to, so I've mentioned a few times now, and we've talked about a few times, spatially expanding the scope of our investigation work throughout the remainder of this year. And we can at the same time expand the analysis that we do on our samples in future sampling events to include the TAL, TCL compounds for volatile organic compounds, semi-volatile organic compounds, metals, aside from cadmium and chromium, pesticides, herbicides. We would we'd make sure that the list includes what it needs to include to be able to confidently cross off everything on the original contaminants of concern list for Dzus.
Thank you, James. I'm now going to go to an online user, Christine Hayes. Christine, I've taken you off on mute.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, hi. Hi, yes. My name is Christine Hayes. So I have a statement question. My husband's family lived on Lake Capri, Hall Street, since 1968. So they lived there for about 50 years. My husband and his brother and my in-laws, they had a boat, went on Lake Capri, I mean, that's what it was all about, outside in the summertime, wintertime, and everything. Ice skating and all such. Also, they had a beautiful pool. And I believe it was 2016 when they first started, they tested the lawn.
They did it once before.
They did it once before, but no big deal. In the interim, my husband developed, should I say what it was?
Go ahead.
Multiple myeloma at 42 years of age. My mother-in-law, who led a very, very clean lifestyle, developed a strange, which they really couldn't even put their finger on, blood cancer, and she was dead pretty fast after that. I believe possibly that was caused from a picnic table that had gotten in the water, fell in the water, and closed off the drainage to go into the bay. In the interim, all the homes on the certain part of Hall Street were flooded with the water from Lake Capri. My mother-in-law, died very, very quick after that. In the interim, my daughter, my mother-in-law, helped my daughter learn how to swim and things like that. So, I mean, I've been listening to you guys talk, and I gotta say that I'm a novice and things like that, but I do know what I have gone through and what the people on Lake Capri, being there for so long, have developed. You keep saying, like, for me, it's empty words. That's what I hear, that, oh, it's significant, insignificant. Oh, it doesn't go above this. Did you ask people around that lake? I mean, this has been going on for years. Did you ask how many, have they developed cancers? Have they, because I know the people that have, not including my family here, but did you ask people? And then for the little children, like my daughter included, she's 27 now. And believe you me, I'm watching her and everything like that. I mean, I'm asking you about the long-term effects. And this has been going on. People keep talking about a cap. To me, I don't know. All I know is I would never eat anything out of that lake. I would, they don't live there anymore, but I'd be very careful of my dogs. And I mean, it's really, for me, I don't know. It's like it's like shadowy. It's really shadowy. And during that time after my husband got sick and I found, all about that, I could not find any information. I did call up a woman. I got in touch with her. She developed a breast cancer. She lived in West Islip. She gave me advice. I had phone numbers and everything. And she told me, don't trust what government people say, because they're not telling you the truth or they're not telling you the whole story. So that was her opinion. So my question to you is, did you ask anybody that was long-term residents, or, if they had health effects?
Is there a cancer map?
Is there a cancer map of Lake Capri and the surrounding areas and Willits Creek?
So this is Wendy Keener from the Health Department again.
Mm-hmm.
And take a look shortly. We do have online on our website cancer incidence maps for the area, and I can take a look at that. And I think it's by zip code area. But generally, when we're looking at sites and determining if there's likelihood of health effects, we focus on first, if exposures were likely to have occurred, and if it's so, at what levels. So my understanding is for Lake Capri, I don't believe the surface water levels were significantly elevated there, and there is a fishing advisory on the lake to let people know that they shouldn't be consuming the fish from the lake. As far as a health study, well, we haven't done one in the area because there wasn't data that suggested there was sufficient exposures to warrant one. And there's a lot that goes into cancer studies and health effects studies, and it's very difficult to pinpoint specific diseases to an individual exposure a lot of times. When you need enough of a population to be able to develop patterns and things. One of the things that we look for when deciding if cancer or other health studies are warranted is if there's unusual patterns of like certain kinds of cancer and things, because unfortunately cancer is a very common disease. About 1 in 3 people in their lifetime will often get cancer. But when there's an exposure, it's generally, it impacts a certain root or a certain, it would cause a certain type of health effect. So we would look for patterns with a lot of people with a lot of the same kind of health issue, or unusually large numbers of unusual cases. But I can take a look at the cancer maps that we have and see if there's anything in this area. In the meantime, if you want to discuss health effects and exposures in more detail, I recommend we can do that kind of thing offline. And we do have some toxicologists and things that we work with that we can refer you to that can get into more details about health effects associated with exposures. So if that's something you are interested in, we can certainly get your contact information and put you in touch with them.
Thank you, Wendy. Christine, if you want to put your contact information into chat, we can definitely reach out to you after the meeting.
And I presume she can do that privately so that others can't see it?
Yeah, the chat should be private just to the panelists. So it wouldn't be public information. Now I'm going to go to another call-in user number 24. Your phone number is a 631-572. I've taken you off of mute. Caller 24, are you there?
Hello.
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to know, with all these concerns and questions, is there a reason why we didn't have a town hall in West Islip for this to take place? And can we plan one and have both the property owners present, along with the DEC, along with healthcare officials, and along with the contractors who were taking care of the property and were the ones responsible for removing the cap?
So the part of the reason we decided on a virtual meeting for tonight instead of an in-person one, excuse me, was we were attempting to prioritize holding a meeting as soon as possible to explain what's going on and our plans going forward in detail. And it was for a few different reasons. It was easier logistically and therefore quicker to set up this virtual meeting instead of an in-person one that would have involved all the same people. That being said, going forward for major milestones where a meeting is warranted, we will be having in-person meetings to the extent possible when we settle on a proposed design for the interim remedial measure, when we are about to start construction on that interim remedial measure. And like I mentioned in the presentation, we'll be providing advance notice for those meetings with all of the time, date, place, details necessary to attend. And I don't know enough. I can't speak to what it would take or how it would work if we needed to compel the property owners to attend a meeting. We have been in pretty close communication. We being, DEC and DOH have been in pretty close communication with the property owners and some of their agents and representatives for a while. Since they took the site, and especially since the cap was removed. And despite that, I can't speak to their willingness to join a meeting. But I think in the meantime, we have our own public meetings to look forward to, and we'll be providing all the information that we have on our end as it becomes available.
Thank you, James. In the text, in the chat, have the new property owners' building renovations been halted? From Danny.
So the redevelopment work at the site has not been halted. It is my understanding is that at this point it is mostly complete. The reason for that is that the original plan for the redevelopment work, if it had been done in a way that that met DEC regulations for redeveloping a site with a remedy like this, there's no DEC has no reason to believe that would have caused any issues with the remedy. And like we've discussed, what went wrong here was that our guidance for that process wasn't followed, and we weren't made aware of the cap removal beforehand, and we did not we did not come up with a plan in advance for removing it, protecting the site in the meantime, and replacing it as quickly as possible.
Thank you, James. I am going to go to online user Tom. You're unmuted.
Hello.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions. I live on a lake. I've been living through this since the early 50s, where Dzus used to dump all his chemicals into the lake. I got a sore throat. But anyhow, why after, just before COVID, the other project, the contractors were running a project from COVID on because the DEC had to leave. They didn't complete it, and I don't know why. All the projects prior to this, we had samples taken for the following year to see how the lake was doing. There were no samples taken since then. And I have animals on the lake, and we get a lot of water because the project wasn't really finished properly. And we got a lot of water on a peninsula of my property that it's always wet because the groundwater is coming up through it because the project wasn't done properly again. A lot of people's property was never touched. Everyone was supposed to get, that had property on the lake was supposed to get notifications. A lot of my neighbor never did, and a couple other people never did. And they had no bulkheading, no stone, nothing. And what I'd like to know is why we're going to go through the whole summer not knowing if the lake is contaminated and what is the contamination, how heavy is the contamination?
So I mentioned before that we're planning on moving downstream from our current sampling locations and continuing to do that until we reach the until we can say confidently that we have found the current extent of contamination. And at that point, we will what we normally do is we would set up what we call sentinel sampling locations, which sampling locations that we've determined are outside of the current extent of contamination. But if and when we do find elevated concentrations at those locations, we know that the contamination has spread or is on the move. And so we are still in the middle of doing that. We're still in the middle of that cycle of expanding our scope, taking samples, taking a look at the results, and determining whether or not we've found the edge of the contamination. And I think at this point, the investigation work this year will likely necessarily include some sampling of Lake Capri. I'm not sure at this point. I couldn't say at this point what form that would take, but I should emphasize that we just received the sampling results from the sampling event in the first week of April. We received those results just a few days ago, and they're still preliminary results. We're still waiting on final data validation. So what exactly the follow-up investigations look like is we're a step or two away from determining that, but we will if we determine that there's a potential that Lake Capri has been impacted by the upstream contamination, we will be moving quickly to do a very thorough investigation of every possibly contaminated environmental media.
Thank you, Jane. I also want to let folks know that when I call on users that are either called in or online, I am lowering their hands after they've asked their question and James has started to address them. If you have a follow-up, please re-raise them. I'm just trying to get through and make sure everybody gets a chance to speak. There's a question in the chat. when are signs going up warning of the hazardous conditions along the creek, especially near schools, shopping center, and other discoveries based on the new test results? From Ed Reagan.
So the history of signage at the site and what signage we might include along Willets Creek in the future is something we've been discussing lately. The exact location and nature. So I guess I should back up for a second and say that that signage is one potential way to enhance the current controls on the site, and just decrease the likelihood that unnecessary exposure to contaminated parts of the creek occur. That being said, the exact location and nature and extent of the signage is something that we would have to work out with the affected property owners, where we determine that we should be putting signage. And so that would include not only that could include not only Captree Plaza and Stop and Shop up near up just south of Union Boulevard, but it would include, residential properties. It would include school property, and that's none of that is to say that it's not something we can't work out, but it would take time for us to first determine where signage is necessary, what it should say, and then work out agreements with property owners to put that signage in place.
And this is Wendy chiming in again. So I just want to go back to our current understanding of the possible exposure scenario. The data that we have so far suggests that levels are really quite low, close to background levels. So there doesn't appear to be an increased risk of health effects. So we wouldn't go and start putting up signs and things unless there was a pretty substantial issue that would cause an immediate health effect as a result of the level of contact that would be expected at the location. So we would need a lot more data to determine that there was a scenario that warranted signage. So at this time, it doesn't look like that is necessary, but we are certainly going to look into it.
Thank you, Wendy. It's just come to my attention that a bunch of questions were sent in privately through chat, which I wasn't able to view them, so I've gotten them a different way. Please, just to let you all know, attendees, that to send your questions to all panelists, and that way I can read them out. I'm gonna just go ahead and get through a few of these before I get back to some of the callers, because some of them have been in for quite a while. From Diane Trommer, why did the DEC wait 5 months, April 21st, before issuing the notice of violation, April 2021 to September 2021, before issuing the notice of violation to the site owner, and then another 12 months before the second notice of violation? This delay seems like it allowed a great deal of contamination to continue, as evidenced by the 2023 cadmium sampling results.
That timeline is something that I tried to explain in a few slides in the presentation, and I know I understand the frustration with it, and the rather the drawn out look. It is drawn out. It is a drawn out timeline, and I would reiterate a few points that I've tried to make, which is that those notice of violation dates, they are spread out, but in between the discovery of the removed cap and the first notice of violation, and then the time between the first and second notice of violation, we were in close communication. We were attempting to work very closely with the property owner to get the cap back as soon as possible. But as I pointed out, that required us to first get them to do it or get them to refuse to do it. And by the time at a certain point in 2021, I'm not sure exactly when during the communications, because it was before my time as project manager, but at some point in 2021 they did agree to restore the cap. And at that point, the way our process works when we work these things out with property owners is that we need to work with them. We can't go around them. And unfortunately, at that point, the restoration of the cap got tied to completion of their restoration work, or excuse me, the redevelopment work on site, and then the redevelopment work also got tied up in a few different ways. And it's unfortunate that it took us as long as it did to uncouple those two, to uncouple the cap restoration with the redevelopment. But as soon as we realized that was the issue at hand, we did make sure that the second notice of violation was more direct, no room for misinterpretation, and we did have a temporary cap in place the next month.
From Valerie Rivera, do you feel comfortable with the businesses on Union opening? Is it safe?
So the businesses that I've been in contact with about the current investigation work and the planned investigation work in May, it's primarily I've been in contact with, I've only been in contact with the property owners of the Captree Plaza tax parcel and the owners of the Stop and Shop parcel. Those are the two property owners, commercial property owners that will be affected by the upcoming investigation work. And in those cases, those areas south of Union Boulevard, but to the west of Willits Creek, that area is we have no reason to believe that that there's any contamination aside from groundwater, and people should not be coming into contact with groundwater since the area is treated by a public water supply, and then potentially some of the soil in the area at depth that has been in direct contact with the groundwater. And again, there should be there should be no scenario where people are coming into contact with contaminated soils. So correct me if I'm wrong or if I've missed something there, Mark, but there's no, as from a human health and exposure assessment concern or point of view, there's no concern currently for those businesses.
Yes, I would agree with that, James. And like I mentioned previously, though, anytime there's any ground intrusive activities that are occurring in relation to, defining nature and extent of contaminants at these sites, like I said before, there will be a community air monitoring plan in place to make sure that that work activity is not negatively affecting the surrounding area.
From Gina, will there be containment tents for soil like last time?
From what I understand of the cleanup and the containment tents, those tents were used during the excavation of creek floodplain soils in order to minimize any potential migration of contaminants via dust. And so the only the only time, since we are not at this point considering cleanup measures for the creek floodplain soils, I don't see any situation where those tents would be necessary. Now, down the line, if we determine that a cleanup response like that is necessary, we might have to consider containment measures like that. We definitely would consider some effective containment measures, as well as community health and air monitoring. But we're a few steps away from determining that, and I should also take a minute to say that we recognize that that last round of cleanup, the excavation of floodplain soils, was very disruptive and intrusive for quite a long time. And so if and when we get to that point, we determine cleanup measures necessary in the floodplain, we would be evaluating all potential alternatives to doing something as disruptive and intrusive as we did last time.
Also from Gina, will the DEC secure the fencing at the bridges for the creek? There are many open areas where children enter the creek.
So I'm not sure if they're referring to gaps in the fencing or gates in the fencing, but I think at this point, like Mark and Wendy have pointed out, walking along the creek in the creek floodplain areas, it does not represent a potential exposure concern or an immediate health risk. And I don't want to put my foot in my mouth too much with health language. That's not in my wheelhouse. But since that's the case, as far as I understand it, unless there's been damage to the fence that needs to be fixed, and I would need to double check who exactly is currently in charge of maintaining the fencing. We would work with whoever is in charge of that to get the fences fixed, but not necessarily thinking about closing off access to the creek entirely.
Yeah, and I do believe they were talking about gaps in the fencing, but I'm not.
And it's also important to consider why the fencing is there and whose fencing it is. I don't know that we have fencing specifically on there, put on as part of the site to restrict access to creek sediments since things were remediated. And like I had said before, the risk of incidental exposure with the sediments at the moment is quite low. The levels have not significantly increased in the places where kids might be accessing the creek. But I'm sure we can look into who the owner of the fences are and if it's related to the site or not, though.
I should clarify that in my response, I was thinking specifically of the fencing at the back of the middle school property. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think part of the reason some of that fencing was installed was to limit access to the creek, but not necessarily close off access entirely.
Thank you, James. All right, as I'm continuing to go through some of these chats, I'm going to switch over to a call-in user. This is call-in user number 17. Your phone number is 631987. I'm taking you off mute to be able to speak.
Yes, good evening. My name is John Davis, president of the Willits Point Association, which runs along the Willits Creek, the east side of Willits Creek in the tidal portion. We've been following this entire remediation process since it began back in the 90s, and I've been listening quite intently tonight. And of course, there's been a lot of conversation about the cap being removed over the area at the eastern end of the Dzus property where the containment pools were. I believe earlier that in the introduction, James explained that area where the containment pools were was covered with two stages. The first one being a concrete monolith, which apparently was mixed on the site, and that covered the whole containment pool area. that was then covered with additional clean fill and capped with the asphalt, which was a parking lot actually, and that was capped back in the 1990s, approximately 30 years ago, when it was still being used as a parking lot for employees. Later on, in recent years, when the cleanup was going on, that asphalt parking area was used as a staging area for the trucks coming in and out, picking up fill and carting it away. Also, it was used for storage of excavation equipment, etc. And just before the asphalt parking lot was removed by the developers, it was really in rather poor condition. It was full of large cracks. I mean, even from the road, you could see the cracks with a substantial amount of weeds growing up through it. So was that cap, that asphalt portion of the cap, really functional at the time it was removed, or had it failed due to its age of 30 years or more? And is it possible that there's something else going on that caused this cadmium level to increase downstream in Willis Creek and approaching the lake? It seems like it's just an awfully short time where the cap was actually removed, and given its condition at the time it was removed, I don't know how functional it really was. I would rather have joined you on the WebEx, but my link was also not working this evening. That's why I am doing this on the phone. Thank you for taking my call.
From what I understand, there was a point at which the cap was in poor condition, and that was before remedial action was completed in 2020. And at that point, when we were made aware of the condition of the cap, DEC was made aware of the condition of the cap. The cap was resealed, and so at the time that it would have been removed in early 2021, the cap would not have been deteriorated or in any compromised state. As to other possible sources for the contamination, the recent contamination, other than the removal of the cap, I would say that I guess in short, we have discussed that possibility internally, and we have pretty confidently ruled out other sources of contamination, including sources from other locations elsewhere on the former Dzus Fastener property. Since both the east and west sections of the Dzus property were cleaned up, we have not seen any spikes or elevations of cadmium or chromium, and certainly nothing like what we are looking at right now with chromium in groundwater in particular. And that the timing and the magnitude of the results indicate they support the idea that the cap removal is the only realistic answer.
Okay, James. Question from the chat. What are the dates of the most recent testing, and can we have the results and who performed them?
The most recent sampling was done in the first week of April. It was the 1st through the 3rd, which I think was Monday through Wednesday, and it was carried out by EA Engineering, who is DEC's consultant for this site. We did include site figures displaying the results in this presentation, and so they will be available when this presentation is made available. The results and the original laboratory analytical reports are going to be compiled in a report that'll summarize the investigation work done this year. It'll be made publicly available later this year in some form outside of the presentation.
Thank you, James. I'm going to go to call-in user number 59. Your phone number is 631574.
Hi, Mike.
I can hear you. Oh, now I can hear you. Hold on. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Bill Doyle. I'm the chief of staff for Senator-elect White. And frankly, this has been a very disappointing meeting from the very beginning. Starting with the link that he gave us did not work for most people, and was exposed to me a lack of information in the past and now giving out to this community. We only heard of it in the first place is because Save the Great South Bay was planning to do a cleanup, and you had to stop them the night before because of this problem. And now we're hearing it's been going on since 2021. You need to have that in-person meeting as soon as possible, because this meeting, I'm sure, has not done little to relieve the anxiety of the community about what's going on now and in the past with this project. I have finished.
Thank you, Bill.
I think we're in agreement that we need a public meeting soon. And I mean, to that point, we decided we needed a meeting, any kind of meeting, as soon as possible. And that is why we set this one as a virtual meeting. I understand there's been a lot of difficulty making this an effective virtual meeting in terms of being able to see the slides, which is a pretty basic component. And it's unfortunate that this hasn't gone off without a hitch, but there will be future public meetings in person. We definitely agree that that's necessary, and those will provide other opportunities for people to ask us questions, express concerns, and in the meantime, both of the project managers here are also available.
Thank you, James. Question from the chat. My understanding is that the owner of the property, Island Associates, still has open permits with the town of Islip. Will all development of the property be put on hold while the DEC is working on remediation?
I think I've answered this in a slightly different version of this question, but to reiterate, the restoration, or the redevelopment of the former Dzus Fastener property has not been put on hold. My understanding is that it is nearly complete. With there were two over the last few years since the removal of the asphalt cap. There were two buildings that were planned to be put up on the property, and they have been built at this point, although they have not been occupied. And so the short answer is no, that the redevelopment work has not been put on hold. And the reason for that is that the redevelopment itself, when done correctly and in coordination with DEC and DOH, was not likely. It was we had no reason to believe that it would cause any sort of issues. And the issue that that started this current situation here is that the redevelopment was not carried out correctly in coordination with DEC and DOH.
Thank you, James. I'm going to go to call-in user number 42. Your phone number is 516639. Are you there?
Hello, my name is Matt. Hello?
Yep, I can hear you.
Hi, my name is Matt. I'm a lifetime West Islip resident. Just in general, very disappointed how everyone handled this prior to this phone call. listening to his phone call. You know, I'm probably not going to be able to sleep for a couple of weeks. Just the fact on how many people dropped the ball and continue to dropping the ball. So, you know, finding out that the cap was open and DEC letting the cap be open, knowing that there is a toxic chemical being put into all our backyards, and them acting in good faith in letting the company fix it when they should have acted in good faith in protecting the residents of West Islip. Because I know if any of you guys who lived within an arm's throw of that site would want that to be capped and not be flowing into all our backyards where kids and everyone play. With that being said, any type of big disaster like this, you know, I've read other scenarios where they kind of test east, west, north, and south and kind of see how far it was affected. They start far away and they kind of dial it in to kind of, find that sweet spot on how much was affected. It seems like you guys are just have concentrated on Willits Creek. Many people who live south of this project, not on the creek, but do have as you guys probably know, because you guys used the word flume before, where this contaminant has flumed out. We all have underwater that goes underneath our houses. We all have sump pumps, French drains that are constantly running from this, from these streams that are coming from Willits Point, the creek, I should say, and the Capri Lake. So my question is, how far east and west did you guys test? And if you haven't tested, why haven't you tested yet? And when are you going to test? That's the first question. And the second question, real quick, is that I think if you haven't started one, there should be, just like at my work, if I come into a contamination, I go to HR and I say, hey, I was contaminated with this, and it's documented. Why aren't we documented the people that are touching this known contaminated area? Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Matt. James?
In terms of the extent of the Willits Creek area, the Lake Capri area that we've sampled so far, we have, I'll stick with, we have not reached Lake Capri yet. We've sampled just upstream of Lake Capri, and for Willits Creek, we've stayed within the creek channel itself, and part of that is because we're doing actually the exact opposite of what you said people might do in other places. We are starting with the source of contamination, which is the site, the former Dzus Fastener property, and we are moving out from there. We're starting with the most up-gradient source of contamination and resolving that, and we did that by getting the cap replaced. And then we're moving down gradient from there to the groundwater that has been released, the contaminated groundwater that has been remobilized. And we are working on an IRM to address that. And at the same time, we are expanding our investigation of the creek area and Lake Capri in order to get a handle on the full extent of contamination. But we do that by starting at the source and moving out, not the other way around. So we will be sampling outside of our current area later this year as a part of our unfolding investigation, the unfolding scope of the investigation. And we move on to other areas and other environmental media when we have evidence that suggests that those areas and those media might have been also impacted by this contamination.
Thank you, James. I'm going to go to call-in user 48. Your number is 631848.
Oh, hey, it's Robin again. I just wanted to get a recap on the number of people on this call? And is the audio also recorded, and will it be posted along with the slideshow? Thank you.
So for the number of people currently, we have 66 participants, but I think we were upwards of 85 at the maximum, with 12 panelists and the rest being attendees. I'm still working out, trying to identify the details of when and how you'll be able to access this webinar or the slides that go with it. If I don't have that by the end of the webinar, I'm sure that James and Mark will be able to answer that question following this meeting.
Thank you.
All right, and I'm going to go to call-in user 17. Your number is 631987. Are you there?
This is John Davis. I already completed my call
Okay.
a little earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I must not have lowered your hand, or I thought it went back up. So that is all of the questions that I see in the chat, as well as hands raised. If there is anyone else that has a question before we finish up for the evening, now would be the time to raise your hand or put something in the chat. I'll give that a second. Oh, I have a call-in user number 10. Your phone number is 631987. You are off mute.
Hi, thank you. This is Christina Marks again. I spoke earlier at the outset of the Q&A. I just had a quick follow-up comment and last question. When I asked about the timeline earlier, Mr. Krugler, you had said that it's the DEC's position to try to wait to get all of the facts and the full narrative before sharing the information. And I just feel like, frankly, that's not their call to make. People can make their own decisions in life based on that pertinent information. I don't want to beat a dead horse about the notification. I appreciate how patient and respectful you've been. I'm just hoping what's done is done, and going forward, there's a mutual understanding that if anything is amiss, that residents in the community are notified right away, even if you need to get further information down the line. You know, to use a quick analogy, Newsday's not going to wait to post a story on a fire that happened until they know why it happened. They're going to put it out there. People have the right to know the information. That being said, I would just like to know when you took over being project manager of this. And, you know, since you're kind of offering your word that you're going to be handling things differently going forward, in the event that you are no longer project manager, is that something that you can make sure that we are also notified of if there is a change in hands? And thank you so much for taking my question.
Thank you, Christina.
So when I was explaining our attempt to build that complete narrative for what's going on at the site and what we are planning to do about it, what we're currently doing about it, I didn't mean to imply that that's exactly the same way we'll be doing things going forward. We do understand, and we've heard tonight that that isn't working for the community, and it's also it's well within our power within that constraining series of guidelines that we have, or requirements that we have, to be in better communication with the community. And so we will be doing that. And as you put it, we won't necessarily be waiting to figure out why the fire started or who started it. We will be letting people know about the fire. I'm sorry, I forgot the second half of the question.
I think they were asking if how long you had been PM, and if there is a future change, can they be informed of that?
So I took over as project manager of this site in June of 2022. And I'm not sure what the process is, what the process typically is for making a notification about the change in project manager, I would have to look into that. I think that could certainly, at the very least, that would certainly be something that comes up at the public meeting, virtual or otherwise, that takes place after I moved on as project manager.
Thank you, James. All right, so we have a call-in user number 38. Your number is 631-304. I've taken you off mute.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, I'd like to know exactly where this cap is located. Is it on the 7-Eleven side of the property? Who built the cap? How deep is the cap? How big and long and wide is the cap? And how come it wasn't lined when they did it? Thank you.
Thank you. James?
So the cap is located on the eastern side of the property, on the side of the former Dzus Fastener property opposite the 7-Eleven. It's part of the difficulty in explaining the exact position in geometry is that it's a very irregular shape, and the shape of the cap was based on the final shape of the monolith, the stabilized solidified monolith below ground, because the cap was designed to cover that surface area, and the shape of the monolith was based on the extent of contamination, based on the extent of cadmium concentrations in exceedance of cleanup criteria. So it all goes back to where was the original contamination, and then up till today we have a very odd shaped cap. It extends over, I'd say, more than half of operable Unit 1, the eastern half of that former Dzus Fastener property. And it's found at different depths throughout the property as well, once again, depending on the extent of the contaminated soil in the first place. The dimensions and location of that cap and the monolith beneath it can be found within Dzus site documents that are publicly available. Why wasn't it lined in the first place? To be honest, I'm not sure whether or not there was a liner installed along with the asphalt cap. I know that currently the temporary cap that was installed in October of 2022, that consists of a foot of clean soil sitting on top of an impermeable geomembrane layer. And that temporary cap is still in place, sitting below the new restored permanent cap. I guess they are now both permanent caps. I could, if you'd like, I could look into the question about the liner, whether or not there was a liner originally, but I know there is one now as a part of the temporary cap installed in 2022.
Thank you, James. And that user, if you want to email James, I'm going to read off his email address for those of you that can't see the slides at the end, and you can contact him and you can further that discussion. Next user's name is Don. I've taken you off mute. Don?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Don Rivera. I live actually on Lake Capri as well, resident here in West Islip, have children in the school district. And I know there's been a lot of talk about communication, but I do want to reemphasize that the conversation we're having this evening, with all due respect, sounds eerily similar to the one we had with the former project manager, Payson Long, who we dealt with extensively in the prior remediation. And the community emphasized the criticality of communication and how essential it was to ensure that the residents were made aware of what's happening. And unfortunately, we're in the same situation here where it seems like communication is problematic. So one of my questions is, what kind of transition was done from the prior project manager, given the history of this site, to you, James, as the current project manager, to understand what the issues were and which ones had to be addressed, with communication being one of the top ones. And another question I had was about I'm still a little unclear. It seems like the DEC indicated to the builders or the owners of the site that things had to be handled a certain way as it relates to the sensitivity of the monolith and the cap. So either that communication of what needed to be done and how things needed to be handled to keep the community safe was not proper or was not thorough enough, or sounds like it was basically completely ignored. So it's one or the other. So I'd like to understand which one it is and who from the DEC was the point person interacting with the owner of the site. Because ultimately, this is all about accountability. We've been dealing with this for way too long in this community. And we talked about this, back in 2019, 2020, that we didn't want to have this conversation again in 5 years, and we're having it again in 5 years. So someone's got to be accountable, and it sounds like the fines that might be in place for the owners and the construction company that didn't follow orders, if that's what it was, are not significant enough. I just can't believe that we're at this state, given the sensitivity and the history of what's gone on here, and we're still having the same conversations about the same issues. So I appreciate the feedback, and I appreciate you guys having this call, and I do look forward to the in-person that we will have as a follow-up to this.
Thank you, Don.
When I took over this site, since I've taken over this site, I've been able to work very closely with at least 3 of the previous project managers for Dzus, and they are we work on different sites, but they are close coworkers. I mean, physically, I work right next to them, so I have always had pretty easy access, and I've always had the ability to reach out to them with questions on the site. I know that for myself and for the previous project manager, we both worked. We both had a lot of input from project managers before us on the history of the site, and that since the site has been around for so long, that perspective has been very useful, and it's helped me get up to speed more quickly. The previous project managers are it's a long list because it's an old site. Their names are all written down on publicly available documents associated with the site. If you're interested, you can look them up. And then regarding the whether or not the importance of maintaining the remedy on the site on the former Dzus Fastener property was understood, I can't really speak to that because I am not the property owner and I wasn't around when they took over the site or when the site entered the site management phase, where the responsibility of the property owner changes quite a bit. But I can say that the responsibilities of property owners for sites are very clear. They're written out in legally binding documents that are required to be signed or at least agreed to by a property owner when they take over a site like this. So I hope that answers your question adequately. I can't speak directly to what was emphasized with them and what stuck.
Thank you, James. I believe that's our last question. I don't have any more in the attendees list or in chat. So that will wrap up this community update. I want to thank you all for joining us and for providing your questions and perspective. And I particularly want to thank you all for your patience and civility as I worked through the two methods of questions. I apologize if I missed a question in chat or a raised hand. We also apologize for the technical difficulties. Please feel free to reach out to James or Mark directly with any questions. And for those of you that are calling in, I want to read out their email addresses for you to jot down if you can. James's email is james.krugler, KRUEGLER @dec.ny.gov. And Mark's is the letter BEEI @health.ny.gov. Again, that's 4 letters BEEI @health.ny.gov. I want to thank you all, and that concludes our meeting for this evening.